So who can we believe? I think we need to believe the real experts. We need to be careful about the marketers, people who write books. There are a couple of books that have been written, and one that's a couple that are very common, very popular in America. And I started writing a critique of these books and going through and looking at the errors in them. And someone else has done it for me, a biochemist in America, which is brilliant. There's another book called Wheat Belly by a guy called William Davis, who's actually a doctor. On the first 3 pages, I found so many errors where people misquote studies, where they cherry pick little bits, where they ignore other things. And I thought, this is really quite crazy. You don't go there. And blogs and internet sites are really not good sources of information. So find someone who actually knows what they're talking about. In general, I think we need to change our relationship with food. We need to eat when we're hungry. And if you haven't eaten for 5 hours, you'll be hungry. We need to get involved with a garden if we can, because I spend much of my life trying to get people to eat vegetables. I now have a collection of, I think, 27 studies which have been done with children, all of them showing that the best way for children to eat vegetables is to be involved with a garden. Children who are exposed to a garden at home, at school, or a community garden are far more likely to eat vegetables. And this has some spin-offs. Now, I've been involved with the Stephanie Alexander's School Kitchen Garden program for many years, and we've done some research with that, and we find that not only do the children from these schools eat more vegetables, but the whole family's diet improves. Because many of the arguments and the poor diets that they have and the fact they don't eat dinner together and everyone's getting upset is because the kids don't eat their vegetables. So the parents don't want to eat with the kids, they don't want to have arguments over dinner, they turn the television on, they feed them instant noodles for dinner, all because they won't eat vegetables. Once the kids eat vegetables, dinner becomes much more of a pleasure and a joy, and the whole family dynamics improve. So we're getting involved with the garden, and out here you've got the opportunity, even if you've only got a few pots, to grow some nice fresh herbs. It's best to prepare your own food from scratch where you can. You don't need to, we're all in a hurry sometimes. I always think if you're in a real hurry, nuts are the answer, they're pretty quick. And quantity is always relevant for absolutely everything. There is nothing that is entirely safe in excess. And there's nothing that you probably, no ordinary food, that you have to ban from your diet forever. If it's not very good for you, you just need friends to share it with. I don't like the all or nothing approach. When we look at red meat, and I personally, for the dietary guidelines, went through every study on red meat. I'm not a vegetarian. I don't have a problem with vegetarians, and I have a couple in my family. But the evidence is actually convincing from the World Cancer Research Fund, who look at every study, and they rate convincing that a high intake of red meat increases the risk of bowel cancer. I've looked at all the studies. We cannot find any studies where there's a higher risk with people eating a small amount of red meat. And by a small amount, I mean it shouldn't take up more than a quarter of your plate. So if you want to put something practical, whereas people tend to have much of the plate taken up with meat. So it's the quantity that is the issue here. If you want to be a vegetarian, and you already saw that there are some great health benefits, I think that is valid. But it's very difficult to find any defects from people who add a small amount of animal flesh to a basically plant-based diet. So that may be safe. People tend to sort of look at vegetarians or non-vegetarians, but there is probably something in the middle that has a small amount of animal products there. We also have this whole fuss these days about fructose. Fructose is the sugar that occurs in fruits and honey, and it makes up half of ordinary sugar. When you buy ordinary sugar, this is 1 molecule of glucose and 1 molecule of fructose. In America, instead of using sugar from sugarcane, they use sugar from corn syrup, and it has a slightly higher content of fructose than the sugar from sugarcane, but it's not all that much higher. People start talking about it being poisonous. It's terrible, it sort of kills you, and they write recipe books that have other types of sugar and say you've got to use glucose or rice syrup, or coconut sugar is the latest one. I looked at the label on the coconut sugar and it said it had, 8 times as much of iron as ordinary sugar or something. I thought 8 times nothing still equals nothing. It is not good to have a lot of fructose, but in these studies that look at the problems with fructose, people are having enormous amounts of their diet as fructose. Actually, there were some studies a few years ago that looked at what would be a good cure for hangovers. And actually, if you give people fructose, they do seem to metabolise alcohol a little bit faster. The trouble is when you give them enough fructose for that to happen, it makes them throw up, which probably is half the benefit, I suppose. But the amount of fructose you get in fruit is not a problem. If you're drinking soft drinks all the time, or you're having lots and lots of fruit juice, that really is a problem. The amount of fruit juice we recommend in the dietary guidelines is no more than 125 mils twice a week. And if it's fresh, if you want juice, have some vegetable juice. This morning I had a look at some juice at the hotel down there, and it was beetroot juice, which was actually quite nice. But if you have beetroot juice, remember that your urine will look pink, and your faeces will also change colour the next day. So don't be alarmed and race off to the doctor. Again, it's always the quantity that's the issue. Dietary guidelines recommend less saturated fat. That caused a problem. When we said people should have less fat, the food industry said, OK, let's make low-fat products, and instead of let's take the fat out. They had to put something else in to put flavour, so they put sugar. So if you look at low-fat yogurts, they have more sugar than the regular yogurt. They're not as bad as some people say, because there's a natural sugar in even plain yogurt that comes from the lactose in the milk. So we had a whole range of food products that came out as low-fat products that had all sorts of refined starches in them. It was the sort of jelly beans are a low-fat food, I can eat as many as I like type problem. And so this became quite a problem. It was not what we ever recommended. When we said less fat, we said more fruit, more vegetables, more whole grains. We didn't say have lots of low-fat ice cream. When people have low-fat ice cream, they actually eat a far bigger quantity than when they have regular ice cream. So we have a whole range of junky low-fat foods on the market. And if you eat them in large quantities, or if they've got a lot of sugar or starch in, that's a problem. If it's low-fat milk, it's not a problem. All they've done is skim the fat off the top. So that's not a problem. If you're having lean meat, all they've done is cut the fat off the meat. That makes sense. But if you put something else back instead of the fat in a product, that's not an ideal sort of thing to do. I think we've covered all of that. But this whole idea, when somebody did an analysis of studies and said, look, the people having less saturated fat have just as much heart disease as the others, other studies have also looked at that and looked at they're all American studies, what were the people eating instead of their saturated fat? They were eating more sugar and more refined starches. So they were eating, more junk food, basically. That is not the answer. So does that mean that it would be a good idea if we all ate lots of butter and lots of cream and lots of bacon? Now I have to stand here and tell you that I do not eat margarine. I do not eat margarine because many, many years ago, when I was a young student, I had a look through a margarine factory and I saw the way it was being made, and I said it was so revolting that I was never going to eat it. I don't eat it because it tastes good. That doesn't mean to say that I think it is really good to slap butter all over everything. I put butter on one slice of toast a day because I really do enjoy it. But at lunchtime, if I'm having bread, I'll use avocado or hummus or, something else. It doesn't mean you can eat lots of butter. By the same token, if you eat a little bit of butter, looking at the context of the whole diet, it's not a big problem. But this butter is back. You should all eat bacon because it's really good for you. Not a single study has ever shown that foods high in saturated fat have any positive health benefits. Not one. And the coconut fat thing. I actually think the coconut fat thing will die soon because it's very expensive, and there is a limit to how many spoonfuls of white fat you can eat, even if some actresses can manage it. And it's very expensive. Is coconut fat really good for you? The answer is no. There's actually been 2 studies reported. One was looking at a comparison with butter, coconut fat, coconut oil, and safflower oil, and looking at the effects on the different kinds of fats in the blood. Butter came out the worst, coconut came out in the middle, and safflower oil came out far ahead. And the other study was done in the 1960s and is repeated all the time by people who say people who eat coconut are really healthy. And it looked at 2 groups in the Cook Islands, one in the Cook Islands and one in Samoa. So the 1960s, they were all very lean. They had a very limited diet. It consisted of lots of fish or octopus. It had coconuts not coconut oil very conveniently or coconut cream in a tin that you could just pour out. And if you're eating actual coconut, you won't ever overconsume it. Your jaws will give out first. They had bananas, they had some other fruits. They had either taro in one group or breadfruit in the other group. They had no processed foods. They hunted, they fished, and they sort of did active work. That is not the same in the Cook Islands and Samoa today, as if any of you have been there will know that the populations there are the fattest populations in the world. And to say that because people in 1960s, when they had a very limited diet and were very active, had no heart disease and they ate coconuts, that this is therefore a good thing to add to our modern Western diet is really quite false. So I don't mind if people eat a bit of coconut. Just don't eat it by the spoonful, and don't have this idea that you have to cook with it. It really has quite a low smoke point for that point. If you're going to cook, use extra virgin olive oil.